Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. John, how are you?
Hey, Marc.
All right. So on today's show, we brought on a special guest, Dr. Eva Selhub. Dr. Eva is an internationally recognized resiliency expert, physician, author, speaker, scientist, and consultant. Dr. Eva engages her clients and our audiences with her powerful energy, words of wisdom, and scientific knowledge to activate the 5 pillars of resilience: physical, mental, spiritual, relationship, and team, to achieve optimal resilience, success, health, and happiness. Eva, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
We're doing a series on how improving your health can improve your wealth. And, we talked to someone about exercise, nutrition, better sleep, parenting. I think today's topic of resilience, dealing with stress, ties a lot together. So I'm really looking forward to it today. And especially if you look at over the past year, I think stress for most of us has been out of control. But before we even start talking about that, how do you define resilience, or what is resilience really?
Let's start with the definition as the ability for something to withstand adversity and bounce back to its original form. So that would be the ability to be pliable and bendable and flexible and not lose your form despite trauma or adversity. So I like to use the analogy of you have 2 drinking utensils on your desk. One's made out of rubber, the other one's made out of glass. If you're me, you're a klutz and you're not paying attention and you swipe your hand and both drinking utensils fly off the desk and land on the floor. One breaks, one bounces. The one that breaks, you can put back together, but it'll never quite be the same. It might be holey. It's probably not going to work to drink out of it anymore. Whereas the rubber one, it'll bounce back. And not only has it bounced back to original form, you know that you can drop it over and over and over again, and it will never break. So there's a mental toughness that comes along with the rubber drink utensil that bounces back to original form, and yet also you get tougher knowing that I could handle all kinds of trauma and still bounce back to original form. Yeah. So the latter, of course, is what we call resiliency. To not only withstand adversity, but also get stronger and wiser as a result of it.
I'm going to tie mental toughness and adversity back to my college wrestling days, but I had a coach that's all he would preach to us is mental toughness, right? You're on the mat and you're doing your moves, but actually you win by breaking the other person mentally. And, you're both going to go through adversity in the match. Whoever deals with it better is the one that's going to win the match. So not that I'm trying to compare it to wrestling, but
but it's true about everything in life. Even if you're wanting to build your muscles have to the fibers are breaking first.
Yeah.
In order for them to regain strength. We look at, different types of stress, and there's a stress called hormesis, which is what, athletes do, which is, they get put under a certain amount of stress and then get stronger as a result of it rather than get weaker. And so you have different options, right? When you go through stress, you either have the post-traumatic stress syndrome where you become weaker and anxious as a result of it, or you become stronger as a result of it. Are you a victim to your circumstances, or are you a victor despite your circumstances? So those are sort of the 2 mindsets there, but also the way physically we overcome illness or overcome trauma or whatever that may be. So physically, psychologically, spiritually. Oh, and by the way, I'm not sure which bio I gave you or you read, but I've actually updated my pillars of resilience to 6. In all those levels, there's a toughness and a resilience that is occurring, mentally, spiritually, financially, emotionally, in your relationships and so on and so forth, that allow us to deal with what life is going to bring us. And it's going to bring us threats. It's going to bring us adversity. Nature just as soon lets a forest fire burn as a flower bloom. It's going to happen. It's how we deal with it that matters.
I'm sure most people, it happens reactively, where they experience the stressful event or whatever the adversity is, and then they can take 1 or 2 options on how they approach it. But is there a way to prepare for it, maybe knowingly or unknowingly, of doing things a certain way or living life a certain way, that you can be prepared mentally or physically for that adversity or something happening.
Absolutely, which is what the Resilience for Dummies is all about, is giving people all the information from A to Z on what one can do. Remember that the idea of having versatility and flexibility is about knowing and doing and being able to do a lot of different things and have a lot of different people in your life, so that when you need it, it's there. So like being flexible in your body and doing all different kinds of a physical activity, not just running, but also lifting and functional movements, or swimming, whatever that is. It's going to give your muscles a bunch of versatility. So should you, I was hiking and fell into a ditch and was able to literally flip myself. I was upside down, was literally able to flip myself over because of my abdominal muscles that I've learned how to do, GHD sit-ups when I do CrossFit. So at 53 years old, I was completely uninjured, where I really should have been deathly injured. So, I was prepared, right? So it's like general preparedness for whatever happens, come what may, which is really what they do in the military, right? They're preparing mentally and physically and emotionally and what have you. So yeah, those 6 pillars that I talk about, which are, physical vitality, emotional equilibrium, mental clarity and toughness, spiritual connection, loving relationships, and our relationships with our community or team as we see ourselves as leaders, right? It's about knowing our influence within a community or a community in a team, and knowing that we don't exist on our own. So both how other people influence us and how we influence them. And when we have that team, when we have that ability to be mentally clear, emotionally sound, physically tough, we just say, bring it,
yeah,
right? Like whatever happens, I'm prepared. And if I don't know what to do, I'll figure it out, and I have the resources to help me.
Is there like a different type of like resilience, or just like a like, I guess what the question would be is like, how does it tie into like your perception? And I guess an example would be, sometimes I feel like maybe we're really hard on ourselves as human beings, so like we all, like, sometimes we want to like blame yourself, like you're just not tough enough, like you're not handling this the right way. Like, how does that play into this? Is that what you're talking about, or is that something different?
Well, ultimately, absolutely. And it's a really good question, because, we can talk for hours just about this one question, because I think it's a really big issue for humanity at large. I think if we all knew how loved and valuable we were, we literally would have not have wars in this world, right? We'd have peace, and we wouldn't have greed and all that sort of thing. It's because we don't feel that we're enough, that we're constantly reaching for something that's outside of ourselves, right? And on one hand, it pushes us to excel and to be financially successful or whatever that is. And as I tell my execs, I'm like, yeah, great, I love money, but what good is all that money if you're dead, right? What good is all that money if you're unhappy? So yeah, the mindset is being shaped by all these pillars, by all these factors, and that mindset is life happening to me? Am I a victim of my circumstances of life, or is life happening with me? Am I co-creator of my life? And so when we are emotionally balanced, when we have emotional equilibrium, quiet mind, there's this very like sort of that Zen place inside. We have a knowing of our value. We don't question our value. We don't take things personally. Setbacks aren't personal. Failures aren't personal. They're just opportunities for growth and learning. Life is happening with me, not to me. So that mindset is something that we can cultivate through a meditation practice, through physical fitness, through getting better sleep, through cultivating wonderful relationships, through self-awareness practices. And when we have that, then we move away from shame or blame, because it's not personal. We go into, okay, what is this, or how is this an opportunity for me for growth and learning? How is this an opportunity for me to get to know myself better? So the first relationship that we want to build is the one we have with ourselves. And it's also, to add, why the spiritual connection is also so important, because that allows us to transcend a lot of that negativity.
So you mentioned CrossFit, you mentioned breaking down a muscle, building it back up. So we get the physical of how to train. How do you do that? How do you train the emotional part of it?
So first of all, it's just being aware, right? The first step on all levels is self-awareness. That's the first thing I teach, is aware of how my negative mindset affects me physically, physiologically, and therefore my behavior. So let's just say, John, let's take what you just said. What was that? I blame myself for not doing, I should have done it better. So let's just say, like, let's take any given situation, and all the listeners can do this as well. I love this game. And now should on yourself for something. So say I should have, done that differently, otherwise it wouldn't have fallen apart. Or I should have exercised, or I should have eaten more healthy. And when you say that statement, I want you to pay attention to what's happening in your chest, to the physical sensations that you're experiencing in your chest and what happens to your breath. Does it feel expansive or contracted? Does it feel open or closed? So just make that statement to yourself and then tell me what it is you feel. Do you feel any motivation to do something differently?
No.
Does it feel like a mountain or a molehill when it comes to trying to create change now?
I think that what it kind of makes me think of the times where I feel like I'm spiraling out of control, and then I take a step back and be like, wait, this is so dumb. Like,
right.
And I guess I kind of get that. It's like sometimes you're in this spot where you're like so overwhelmed, but then when you really, it seems so real. Like it seems like a mountain, at that moment.
Focusing on that particular feeling.
Yeah.
So now what I'm going to do is have you change the statement and replace should with could. I could have done that differently, or I could have exercised, or I could have eaten better today. And just change the statement and tell me what you feel when you do that.
I mean, it seems like it just changes the perception.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean,
the one word changed the vibration in your body, changed the perception, and you went from shame to accountability. Right? We're not Pollyanna. We're not saying, yeah, everything's fine. We're saying, yeah, I could have done that, but I didn't. But now we've opened up the realm of possibility. I could do it differently. We've opened up. Now it's become a hill rather than mountain. It's saying, yeah, I could do this. I chose not to. So we're taking responsibility for our actions without shame or blame and taking an account of what's going on and saying, yeah, now there's a more likelihood of change. We're saying, yeah, okay, I could do this. Yeah, that's possible. All right, I'll figure it out. And so that's an example of limiting words, limiting beliefs, negative statements, that literally your mind goes from this open, expansive, anything is possible, which you can even take the two extremes of love and hate, right? When we're in love, I mean, everyone's probably been in love at some point. You're stupid to a certain extent because you think anything's possible. You're like, in La La Land. And the reverse of that is fear or hate, right? Where everything's closed in. You're like a horse with blinders and you can't see your way out of something. It's do or die. And that's literally what is happening physiologically. So when I talk about self-awareness, I talk about being aware of the physiological response our words, our actions, our thoughts, or what have you, our behaviors have in our physiology, which allows us to either believe in possibility or in no possibility. So in the impossible or the impossible with an M or an N, right? So we're in a negative state, we go into that victim mindset. We all do, it's just human. When we're in the open state, expansive state, we become the victor. We become the co-creators of our life. So when we find emotional equilibrium, it means noticing when we're in a negative space and being able to stop and relax and clear that negative emotion, that negative energy, and find our equilibrium. So then we have access to the logic that is actually there. We don't have access to logic and rational thinking when we're in that stress response.
Does it make sense to even take it a step further? So instead of, that, all right, the initial thought was negative, that should have, that you turned it into the could have, the possibility, to even look at maybe like an affirmation or a visualization of some kind of desired outcome that you're looking for. So even take it to the positive outcome.
Absolutely. No, and that is part of the work, right? But the first thing is you're not going to go from totally negative to everything's great. That's a big jump, right? So we have to take steps. Otherwise, you're not going to believe it, right? If you say everything's great when you're feeling like crap, that's not going to work. When people say, oh, just stop worrying, be happy. You want to slap them in the face, right? That's just, you're not going to jump there. But you can, first you want to clear that negative energy, that negative feeling, and then we start building upon it, right? And we start reconnecting with what the body. So an example would be is what we want to do is be aware of how something causes us to feel. Like when you say, I should have done this differently, I didn't ask you what you thought, I asked you how it made you feel. And then we say, well, that feeling, causes me to feel like I'm not going to be able to accomplish anything. Well, what do I want to feel? I want to feel invincible. I want to feel powerful. I want to feel, like I can do this. All right. Well, how about we just connect with that feeling then? I like the feeling of feeling invincible. I like the feeling of feeling powerful. And then we start working towards engaging our memory and our body in the memory of being in that feeling. And then from that feeling, we actually can come up with solutions, right? As opposed to waiting to feel that way, should I find the solution? I'm going to feel that way first, and then the solution will find me. So the point is that we want to, it's really, if everything's energy, challenging to go from a very low energy to very high energy. I mean, it's not that you can't do it, it's just more challenging. So if we just keep shifting our energy through breathing, meditations, affirmations, whatever works for you, what that's doing is helping us raise our energy so that we have access to the positive beliefs, positive statements, rational thinking, and our ability to access the support that is around us. When you're in a negative space, you don't want to talk to anybody. You either push them away or you withdraw.
Are these steps like pretty much the same, like with everyone that you encounter? Like if you sit down with someone and say, is this really where you say to start as far as these things you're outlining, as far as like those mental, it almost reminds me, there's this guy, what was his name? Gary John Bishop. He talked about like this inner voice and like how much you don't realize, like it's there all the time. And you're always saying these things to yourself. Is that like a first step for most people that you if they come to you and say, hey, look, I really want to try to get my stress under control? Is this where you would recommend people start?
The first place I have people start is through body awareness, right? I teach them about stress physiology, and through being aware of what we say and how we speak and our behaviors affect us physically. It's the one thing that's objective. Right, emotions, thoughts, none of that stuff's really objective. Those are, if you give your brain the ability, it'll just go on and on and on about nonsense forever. But what we can, connect with is how we feel, whether something aligns us to feel, balanced or at peace, or whether it causes us to feel stressed or contracted or not in peace. So that's, the first thing I do is have people just become aware of that and become aware of how we sort of co-create our own suffering. We create our own stress by these messages, and to understand that most of the voices in your head aren't yours. All right. You did not know an apple was an apple until somebody told you it was an apple. So everything you think you are is based on what other people have said and what society has told you, or what teachers have said, or what your parents have said, or things like that. We've got messages that culture, society, parenting is put into our brains that we think that's the way it should be. Right. So that the next step is, for me, ultimately, is teaching people to know who they are and to know their value from inside out rather than from outside in.
Is there different levels to it where the should have game, it's kind of straightforward, right? I should have done this. But what about someone who is really struggling with stress, where it's actually impacting their ability to function? Where do they start?
Well, that's a lot of people. By the way, that's especially this past year and a half. That's not an exception. It's been a rule. And we start from the beginning. We start from, again, self-awareness, learning how to breathe, how to pause, how to turn off the mind, how to take care of ourselves and take care of our bodies so that we can handle the stress that's happening. One of the things, I think you've had a show on this already, but sleep. It's very, very important for us to get our sleep so that we can handle life. Or, we're an athlete. Working out every day is just as important as the days that you don't, because the body needs recovery in order to handle the trauma of working out. So cultivating the support that we need to handle adversity, and not only that, to understand that when we are suffering or in a negative state, we don't have the ability to think clearly. We don't have access to rational thinking, and we don't have access to reaching out to the people we need. And then we co-create more stress. So it's not about denying that we're in a hard situation or a challenging situation. It's saying, given what is, what am I to do, and what's available to me to help me get through this, and to start accessing that support. So it's about being proactive about what's happening rather than victimized.
It reminded me of like how fascinating it is to me, the connection between the brain and the mind and the body. One of the things it reminds me of was when I was reading this like study about how they could measure the body's performance based off of how tired or how stressed their brain was, and how the ultimate endurance athletes weren't necessarily physiologically any better than like the guys they were beating, but for whatever reason their brain wasn't getting as tired. And the tired athlete would sometimes lose to the really like the very, I guess, rested athlete, just for the lack of a better word, but I mean more from a mental perspective. But also, like, one step further is like the body's health. Just you could have really like your vitals that we talk about, like your blood and like the cholesterol, but like how much like stress will actually affect like the blood pressure, just in that connection. Obviously you've hit on that already, but how does that come into play, and like how much does it come into play, what you've seen as far as like how stress is affecting people physiologically?
Well, let's go back a bit and talk about stress and the stress response, because once that's explained, all of that, those questions will be answered for you. So the first thing to understand is the definition of stress, which is not necessarily bad. Right? Everybody says, "Oh, I'm so stressed." Of course you are. You're in a human form. As long as you're in human form, you're going to experience stress. And so by definition, stress is really just a term of physics. That means that a system is in a state of balance and then it gets challenged. That state of balance gets challenged. Okay? If you remember from biology, the word homeostasis. So every living organism's desire is to be in a steady state or a state of homeostasis, which is impossible to maintain, to be a constant, because life is constantly changing. We're dynamic beings. We live in a dynamic system, which is living, breathing Earth. So it's constantly changing, and that state of homeostasis is constantly being challenged. And so the body is designed brilliantly to be able to notice when these challenges happen, when stress happens. So for instance, you could be sitting here and being perfectly happy, and then all of a sudden you're hungry. Guess what? Hunger is a stress. Cold is a stress. Fatigue is a stress. Being uncomfortable is a stress. And then what happens is that the brain picks up that there's a stress present. It triggers an automatic response that creates physiological changes. Those physiological changes trigger a physical response, which is the behavior, which corrects the problem. So you're back into homeostasis. So for instance, you're hungry. You notice that you're hungry. You get motivated to go get something to eat. You get something to eat. You're no longer hungry. That's called allostasis, which is the ability to achieve stability through change. That's how human beings, basically all living organisms, exist. We have a stress, we're motivated, and we do something about it, and then we're back in balance. Nothing would happen in our lives. We actually would be dead if we did not have stress. Stress is what motivates you to make money. It's what motivates us to learn new things. Not having enough information is a stress. Right? Wanting to know more about something is a stress. It's a situation of lack that motivates us to go fill up the hole. Okay? So we'd have no innovation, no creativity. We'd have no species because we'd have no desire to go get our species to increase in number. We wouldn't mate, because mating is actually very stressful. But there's a desire to fill the hole, right? To get more people, to get a bigger human species, or to get, to have a high. We have seeking pleasure because we're in a place, so that's lacking pleasure. So any situation of lack is stress, and stress is absolutely necessary for human life, for any living organism. The problem comes not so much that there's a stress present, but that there is a perception that I can't handle that stress. That I'm hungry and there's nothing to eat. And I'm in the middle of the desert and there's no food. Now it's becoming a threat. So there's a difference between stress and a threat, okay? Because when the brain perceives that something's threatening, then the stress response will be overly activated, which can cause pathological problems. So a threat would be, for instance, I'm being chased by a lion. Okay, I'm not going to take a nap. I'm not going to forage for food. I'm not going to reproduce. My muscles are going to want me to run like man and fight like hell. My immune system's going to be revved up. So heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, respiration goes up, metabolic system shuts down into something called catabolism. Muscles become more tense. The immune system is revved up. There's more inflammation. Neurotransmitter levels drop because it's not a good time to be happy. You need to be scared or angry. Your brain shuts down because it's not a good time to do logical thinking or figure out how to do your taxes. You need to go from point A to point B. Okay, you following me? So all these physiological changes are necessary and beneficial in the short term. But in the long term, if there's a continued perception that something is awry, that a stress is not manageable, it becomes a threat, then the stress response becomes activated. So we have continuously high inflammation, high blood pressure, high heart rate, high muscle tension, and so on and so forth, which eventually is going to cause the system to break down because it can only handle so much. So our relationship to stress in our body is more so the perception that we can't handle something and we can't manage it, which is why the should versus could is so important. Because in the should state, I'm in nothing's possible. I'm in a threatening situation. In a could mindset, it's possible, I'll figure it out. Now I'm in, I got this. So it's a difference between I'm hungry and I'll go get something to eat because I've got food in my refrigerator, and the difference between I'm hungry and I'm in the middle of the desert. And the brain is always going back to the past to figure out how to deal with the present and anticipate the future. So when your emotions are involved, it takes you back to when you were a 5-year-old and had no resources. It doesn't remember that you're 40 years old and you know a lot about the subject. Okay, that's why it's important to find an emotional equilibrium, because then you move yourself back into your adult brain, into your knowledge, into your rational thinking, into your openness, into your ability to connect with people, which disappears when we're under that belief that we're under stress, which is why the mindset of I got this is so important, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally.
Can meditation help with clearing up some of that mindset?
I mean, every single one of my clients learns how to meditate. It's a big piece. And I don't have people meditate for long. You don't have to sit there and do, a lot of this is just breath work. It can be anywhere from, 1 minute to 10 minutes or 20 minutes. The key is to learn how to quiet that mind and remember what it's like to be in a state of stillness, from which you can then everything, can then move from there. And from that place of stillness, we have objectivity. Place of objectivity, we make better decisions. We're more open. We don't take things personally. We're better able to handle things. We become more like that piece of rubber. I liken it to the being in the Matrix, right? If you remember that movie, The Matrix, or Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, we're then able to, withstand the stress and be able to bounce back and transmute or transform our energy in a more productive or constructive way.
Is that something that you can learn over time? Do you see people learning it and then falling back and needing?
But that's how we learn. I actually look. If I didn't think it worked, I wouldn't be here. I've been doing this for 25 years. Literally, I've been doing this work for 25 years with people, and thousands of people I've seen grow and change, and it's really a delight to see. But it does take practice, right? It's something that you have to be diligent about. I mean, and it's something that what's really beautiful about it is that life gets richer the more you do it. And, you just literally get happier the more you do it, despite what's happening in your life. But it is practice. And everybody I know, falls off the wagon, and they need to, because how else would you learn? I mean, we learn by contrast. So you don't know, most people don't know that they're walking sick. They're walking around sick because they're in a homeostasis. They're in a sick homeostasis. The body will, will always want to go into a steady state. So you don't even know that it's possible for you to feel better until you do. So let's say you feel really, really good for like 4 weeks, 2 months maybe, and then you fall off the wagon, you're going to feel like crap, which is great because now you have something to compare it to. You say, wait a minute, I don't like the way this feels. I want to go back to feeling really healthy and strong, and we all do it. Like, I want to go back to that. And so then, your body, your mind has a memory, and you're going to be able to go right back in it and then also be more motivated. Because you've got a motivation of feeling good, rather than getting out of something negative, you're wanting to uphold something positive, which is a better motivation.
You mentioned the different types of stress, and stress can be really anything. Do you approach it differently based on the type of stress, or is it kind of this is the approach we're going to take, whether the stress is coming from whatever area it's coming from?
Well, look, I approach it differently based on the individual, because everybody's language is different. And you have to meet people where they are. So it's not like there's not a cookie cutter recipe. Now, will everybody learn, and learn to cultivate the pillars? Absolutely. But some people have cultivated their nutrition pretty well. But in the end, it comes down to, what is it that people, where's the tweaking? Most people need to work on their identity, their sense of self. Well, especially when it comes to money. or relationships, right? Because we've been told that our value rests in, let's say being married in a heterosexual relationship and having children. And if you're not that, you're ostracized, or you're somehow bad, or you're somehow a failure, or your value comes in being really wealthy. Again, like I said, there's nothing wrong with being wealthy. It's my attachment to wealth that determines my value. So if I'm not wealthy, then I'm a failure. That's the problem, right? So it's about, how do I co-create this knowledge of abundance? How do I create this knowledge, co-create this experience of loving relationships, right? So that it's a sort of an energetic quality that I exude. So therefore, I get those channels and they're in my life. But whether or not I'm happy is not predicated on whether any of that stuff happens.
Yeah.
So that's what's going to be the same for everybody.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see it being a different approach. Well, Dr. Eva, I want to thank you for being on the show. We're just about out of time. How best can someone reach out to you, find out more information about what you do?
Well, you can, I have websites, drselhub.com and drselhubcorporate.com, which you can visit. There's lots of content there. I'm in social media, so lots of content being sent out every day, whether it's LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. Yeah, you never know where I might be on some type of speaking tour or something of that nature. And my recent book, Resilience for Dummies, is out, so you can get it on any online store.
Awesome. We'll link to all that in the show notes. And thank you very much. You gave us a lot of great information, especially in these times where everyone's dealing with a lot of stress, and I'm sure we all could be reacting better to it.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.